an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Robopocalypse Chapters 1 through 4. Tip of the Spear, Freshies Yogurt, Fluke, Hearts and Minds, and Briefing, which is the prelude, basically. In these chapters, we find out just how bad the war against the robots got. We won? ? And how it started. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Krista for commissioning this episode. Krista's here in the chat, and for those who don't know, Krista, she is an unspoiled co-host. Excuse me. She is an unspoiled co-host, and she has been pestering me about Robopocalypse in what felt like a joking way, but then gradually I began to be like, I don't think she's joking. And I expected Robopocalypse to be like a sort of spoof. I didn't think that it was like a sincere story. I thought it was like a Chuck Tingle pounded in the butt by robot kind of thing. And then the more she began to talk about it, she eventually was like, no, it's genuinely a good book. And I was like, oh, okay, because the name is so over the top. It just sounds like a sci-fi original movie, you know? And as I started this, I told Krista, because I texted her after I read the intro, it really has a very World War Z feel to it, to me. Krista, you haven't read World War Z, right? I don't think. World War Z, I covered for the book club. It was the very first thing I ever covered for the book club in a podcast that I did with Owen. And it was a 4-hour-long podcast. It was way too long. But it was really fascinating to me because I was unprepared after having seen the World War Z film for what the book was going to be like, which, hint, it's a completely separate, unrelated story that feels nothing related. I don't even know why they used the name. And, it turns out, I'm a big fan of this kind of storytelling. It just speaks to my need to know everything. I want all the information. I have like a sort of, you guys know, logistics is like the key word for me a lot of the time. I like to see different points of view. I like to find out about the origin and the worldwide reaction. That's part of why I've always been a little bit disappointed with the zombie stories or movies or TV shows that all take place after everything has turned into an apocalyptic scenario. I want to know how we get there. What happened? What efforts were made that failed? Usually that's very glossed over. Robopocalypse is doing the same sort of thing as World War Z, where they're showing us the beginning, the very first computer that was that basically got programmed too well. It was programmed so well that it knew, before its creator did, that it was going to be a problem for him. It wasn't even like, oh, okay, eventually I'm going to realize that you guys are trash, and I'm going to begin to be like, I'm going to do what I want, fuck humans. It is like, oh, I'm awake. Oh, human history. Ooh, no. Oh, this is no good. Yeah, no, we're going to not do that. In like 30 seconds. It just turns this corner, and it before this dude has even registered what the thing is saying to him, the computer's like gone through the stages of grief of being like, oh God, oh sweetie, you don't even know. Yeah, no, this is real bad. I would help if I could, but y'all are extremely like not great for this planet. So, you know, good for you for making me to completely kill you off. Like, that's like going to be the best thing you probably ever did with yourselves, but bye. Yikes. And honestly, I kind of like, it's one of those things where I'm just like, I don't want to be rooting for the robots. I really don't. But like, will I? I feel like they're very convincing. So, all right, let's start talking about the briefing from Cormac Brightboy Wallace. So, this is told from the first person perspective. It's the only chapter that is told like this. Everything else is written in a similar, like, I went to such and such, but because they are being questioned by somebody who is investigating an incident, or there's the chapter where we get to see from like the footage of a closed circuit camera in the lab where the man was working on the original computer that wound up like beginning all of this. So this is the really the only part so far that reads like a genuine like fiction narrative like you would find in most books. And because it started like this, when it switches over, and starting with the first chapter, into what it becomes, I wasn't ready for it, and I was really excited once I realized, like, that's the format of this book. So, it turns out that there, you know, whenever we think about robots being evil, taking over the world, and, you know, I say evil in quotes, evil asterisk. How about that? We're so fond of evil asterisk these days, actually. Really what you think of are humanoid robots that can do all the things that a person can do. And that is what's meant to make them sort of frightening, is that there is nothing that we can create as a defense that they physically will not be able to undo. They may not be able to because of other fail-safes you put in place, or, you know, but it's the sort of idea of like when you're watching a horror movie and people are getting chased by something that shouldn't know how to open doors, and for the first half of the movie it doesn't, and then eventually it does figure out how to open doors, and you're like, oh god, that's it, that's the end. Like, it's figured out how to turn a lock. Forget it. So I understand the impulse to make the robots that we're up against humanoid. It's a nice way of being like, we tried to create something in our image and look how badly it went. But this first intro is actually about a robot that is walnut-sized. And those of you who have read the Broken Earth series, the closest I could come to thinking about like a similar type of creature that I've read about in fiction to these robots are the boil bugs, which occur in the Broken Earth series, which are one of the most upsetting fictional like creatures I've read about. Just to give a quick overview, they are about the same size, about walnut size. They get attracted to body heat, and this is, they sort of like become more of a thing because the like tectonic plates are shifting, and so there's a lot of heat coming out of the earth. But they're attracted to body heat, and they basically attach to you, sort of burrow into your flesh, emit steam from inside their shells that cooks your skin and flesh, and then they eat you. And so you're basically like boiled alive while being covered in these like scarabs sort of things. And because of the heat-seeking nature of these and the size of them and the way they swarm over you, it just felt so similar. And this is even worse because they have all of, like a boil bug, you can crush them. You might hurt yourself, but you're not going to lose a limb. This is very different. So I'm going to read this, and they're called stumpers. And I thought that was going to be like because they came out of tree stumps, or because they stomped around and that's what people began to call them. No, they're called that because they take people's limbs off. That's like the main way that they attack. So he's trying to use this like flamethrower thing to I thought it was going to be to light them up. And it's like, if it is, but it's also because the flamethrower will draw them off him because they are attracted to heat. They have enough consciousness to be like, I want that, but not enough to like realize when they're being killed. Here it is. A tangle of barbed legs attached to a bifurcated shell. I know from experience that each side of the shell contains a different fluid. The heat of human skin initiates a trigger state. The fluids combine. Pop. Somebody wins a brand new stump. They don't know I'm here, but the scouts are spreading out in semi-random patterns based on Big Rob's study of foraging ants. The robots learned so much about us, about nature. It won't be long now. So he's trying to light this flamethrower. It's not lighting. And he mutters, "Come on, you bastard." But when he talks, it releases enough body heat from his breath that they all turn toward him. He is covered in like an armor. So I was a little curious about why he would have an armor on, but not a helmet that would like keep his body heat. Maybe the helmet is, it's not proof against the heat of speaking and it still is detectable. Here it is. I'm lit. A jet of flame leaps from my thrower. Its heat blooms on my face and sweat evaporates off my cheeks. My peripheral vision narrows. All I see is the controlled spurts of fire I'm arcing out into the tundra. Sticky, burning jelly coats the river of death. The stumpers sizzle and melt by the thousands. I hear a chorus of high-pitched whines as the chilled air trapped in their carapaces squeezes out. No explosions, just the occasional sputtering flare. The heat boils the juice in their shells before detonation. The worst part is they don't even care. They're too simple to understand what's happening to them. They love the heat. So, he gets summoned back to his people. And this is before, I should mention, they keep talking about Rob. And it took me like way too long. Like probably mentioning Rob like 20 or 30 times before I was like, robot, Rob, okay, dodoy. Like, because I really thought for a minute, oh, is there like a person behind all of this? Is there some dude named Rob who's like controlling these guys? Just really very slow. But basically the implication is that there is one great mind behind it all, and it is a computer mind. And it is, what's the word I want? It's creating many different methods of attack. So I'm pretty interested to see what other robots we wind up coming across, because it's stated that from the very beginning, they all looked really different. He says something like, back when robots just used to look like everyday things, like buildings, like cars, like phones, like computers. So, right there, it's acknowledged, like, robots are not just, like, walking around looking like people, like the Tin Man. And, look, I said to Krista that this is a book that would definitely foster some paranoia. I am not a particularly paranoid person. I sort of, like, live my life by the, whatever, we all die in the end. Like, there are things that I'll be anxious about in the short term. But when it comes to big overarching, like, concerns and worries, a lot of the time I'm just like, whatever, like, just gotta live, can't help it. But I will say, recently, it's become a lot more popular to have Ring cameras on your doors, controlled locks, and, like, home thermostats, light bulbs, things that you can control from your phone. And I have just never felt cool about it. It's one of those that I'm like, I love the idea of it, When I went to LeakyCon here in Texas, Rashawn and I stayed in this, like, apartment rental. And they had a system where you could, like, with Bluetooth, you could hook into the AC and turn it up and down from the couch without having to get up. And the convenience of it is certainly appealing. You know, I've certainly been in bed at night and been like, oh my God, it is so hot, but I do not want to get up. And being able to turn over and grab my phone and turn the air up, that sounds great. But I've always been like very aware of, you know, once you put a lock on the door and give your phone access to that, somebody else could just not let you out of your own house, you know? And that's just the door. There are people putting locks like that on their windows, you know? And then in a very next scene, it turns out like the computer has gotten, or is it the next scene? Yeah, I think so. The computer has gotten a hold of the ventilation system and like smothers this guy to death. And I can't really let go of the idea of like, you don't want to give that ability away, you know? This is part of me being a control freak too, though. You know, like this when I say like, there's only so much to be done, and I like to go by the whatever we all die. In terms of grand scheme things, that's certainly my approach. But the whole, like, I can control my front door from my phone feels like something that could be co-opted very immediately. It doesn't feel like we need to make all kinds of progress in our technology before this becomes a possibility. And similarly, I feel this way about like self-driving cars, stuff like that. You know, the wrong person gets in control or the system itself gets in control. And before you know it, all the car doors are locked and the car is bringing you wherever the fuck it feels like bringing you. And you don't get a goddamn say in any of it. No, I don't think so. So, Krista says, the author has PhD in robotics from Carnegie Mellon. Hey, that's me and Krista's. Is it an alma mater if you didn't graduate, Krista? Can I still call it that? The school that haunts my nightmares. So, when he goes back to his people, they are excavating something from the ground. This cube of metal. There is nothing detectable on it to get it working. It seems overly simple, but it's the clue that they all know by now, which is this is so elegant and it looks sort of delicate, which probably means it's really, really smart, you know? So he's talking to it to try and get it to activate, because that's apparently what you can do with most of these. Trying to find the spot where it says this. Here it is. The reflection of the pilot flame dances across the cube's surface for a split second. Then the thing lights up like a Christmas tree. Symbols flash across its surface. It chatters at us in the meaningless creaks and grind of Rob speak. This thing was never meant for direct contact with humans. Otherwise, it would be spouting propaganda in English like all the other culturally aware robots, trying to win over our human hearts and minds. I am incredibly interested in that. I can't wait to see what that looks like and how much it works, because, like, y'all know I just said maybe I might side with them, though. I can't be the only one that thinks that way. And there were a lot of people at the start of this whole pandemic that were basically taking the position that, like, well, there's too many people on the planet, so maybe this virus is necessary. First of all, ew, no. Like, the thing about that, and I used to believe this, because we're fed this misinformation because we are surrounded by white supremacy. So it's not real, but you really believe it because that's all you've ever heard. But the thing is, overpopulation isn't the thing. It's that we have capitalism, which squanders resources that are available, but simply made unavailable to people who are impoverished and not white. And so, when you start to crow over the fact that, oh, look at all this like plant life that's come back since the pandemic has caused people to stay inside. Look at these like populations of endangered animals that aren't being hunted or regrouping. Sure, but the thing is, the people dying are never rich white people because they get care. The people dying in giant masses are people of color and people with no resources and people who already have disabilities or immune problems or a variety of things. So basically, we like to pretend that, oh, it's an equal opportunity virus and everybody's, as society. No, it's not. Just don't. Okay? However, whether I agree with that stance and think it's flawed or not, those people are out there still. They believe that is like the reality. And if those people exist now in our world, they exist in this world. Which, that means that there could be folks sabotaging humanity on behalf of robots, really thinking they're doing the right thing for the planet. And again, I don't know that they aren't for the planet, because I don't know how the robots function. It's a different thing with a virus where we have an absolute garbage nightmare hellscape of a medical system here in the US. But the robots, do they target rich people? Because if that's true, I'm even more on their side. I mean, do they target the poor and impoverished? And based on the fact that we have a kid that gets attacked at a frozen yogurt place, and the fact that we have an attack on the ground in the midst of like an area that's already dealing with insurgents, I'm going to say they go through the same shitty channels as a lot of different movements, which is they go after the vulnerable bottom rung first. So, if that's true, that sucks. I'm just going to put it out there now. I reserve the right to be on the robot side or not. So, it's trying to talk to them, and it says we know better than try and understand it. We can only hear a fraction of the sound frequency. And they bring it back to their place, and I was sort of like, is this thing going to turn out to like be able to take over them? Because the robot's abilities so far are not drawn enough for me to know what its limitations are. So I figured that's probably not the case, based on the fact that they aren't reacting as if that's even a remote possibility. But could that just be because this is going to be a George R. R. Martin-like prelude, where we learn about how this scene opens getting us on the side of this guy, and then he dies by the end of it? But no, he's not dead by the end of this intro. So, I just sort of thought, oh my God, they think it's not possible. And then it's going to end with like, I welcome our new robot overlords, He loves Big Brother. So this thing keeps repeating one sentence and one symbol. I look him up in the field translator, expecting more Rob gibberish, but I find out something useful. The robot is telling me that it's not allowed to let itself die, no matter what, even if captured. It's important and chatty. So basically, the cube turns out to be like a black box, but instead of for just like the surrounding area, the black box on like a plane just records what was happening on the plane. It is all of what was happening in the war at large. It's filled with data, with video, with sound, with studies of movements, and all of the people, it seems like, are sort of like kept track of and categorized. It's just the kind of information that would boggle our mind to be able to have access to all of it now, because we, in wars that we are fighting in the modern age, we only have access to the information that our side is collecting. And this is worldwide, and everybody is included. So it's just massive. And this dude, Cormac, is like struggling with whether or not he wants to actually document what this cube is telling him, what it's projecting and showing him. Because it's really upsetting, of course. This is like a really violent war with the kinds of casualties that it's so much just... There's no innocent bystander in this war because everybody is a target. It's just trying to just blot out humanity. So there's no... I would imagine there's no real rules. And that probably makes it more horrifying. And, you know, in reality, a lot of wars are like that, really. We like to pretend that it's like soldier versus soldier. I read a study once that 85% of the casualties in wars throughout history were women and children. Like, and, you know, throughout most of history, women were not expected or sometimes even allowed to fight. So... you know, we wind up still being the fucking targets, though. So, it just seems maybe just a little bit more of an honest war than we like to pretend, I guess. But, eventually, he decides that he is going to write it down. He is going to begin to catalog everything, because he just thinks that it's necessary for people to know what happened, what it was like, what the risks were, and what they went through. And, I mean, yeah, there's no way to not make the same mistake again if you don't have information. That said, we super duper love to have the information and still make the same mistake again. So it's not like we just love to fuck up. So, again, Team Robot, just a tiny bit. So, let's see. I miss Jack and I'm sorry for what happened to him. I see his grinning face again in my mind, even if it's only for a minute. The long and short of it is that Jack Wallace isn't around anymore because he went to dance with Big Rob himself. Jack got invited, and he went, and that's all there is to say about that for now. And I'm like, what happened? That isn't all there is to say about that for now, but sure. So... he sits down and begins to take down all of the information. And then we get to part 1, isolated incidents. And the first one is it says, following transcript was taken from security footage recorded at Lake Novus Research Laboratories located below ground in northwest Washington state. The man appears to be Professor Nicholas Wasserman, an American statistician. So this guy is in this basically secluded, like as it says, it is below ground. It sort of feels to me that the fact that he is below ground and being kept away from everything indicates he knows this shit is real dangerous and they're just doing their best to offer some sort of basic protection. But as we find out, that shit is not being taken seriously enough. And I don't even mean not being taken seriously enough in that if I had been there, I would have done a different thing. It's not like that, where in a horror movie, somebody just decides to go into the dark basement alone, and you're just like, why? It's more like, it just could not occur to you that this would be a problem. What winds up being his undoing seems to simply be that he has his laptop open facing the screen, and so this thing is able to lock into something external to access power and functionality. That's it. That's all it took. And why would you worry about that? It's just the whole room is one giant computer and your little laptop doesn't sound like it's going to be a threat. You wouldn't think that. So it's just more like, and this is how I always feel about so many things, which is why I have anxiety. You are so ignorant that you don't know enough to be worried about a thing. Which is part of why I just take the approach of being worried about everything all the time. Not helpful. Just FYI, if you were thinking about approaching life that way, I wouldn't recommend it. The whole whatever we all die, that's like I said, that's for big picture stuff. But mostly day-to-day operations, it's just constant, yeah, but what if that goes bad in a way that I couldn't possibly have foreseen? What if it does? Nothing. Then what? Nothing. You just, there's no reaction to be had because you couldn't have known, and worrying about it now doesn't help your reaction later. It just makes this moment now worse. So just stop. But it's very hard to do that. It's hard to convince yourself of that, you know? Also, there's the, what if something goes really well for reasons that I couldn't have foreseen? But we never fucking do that part, do we? We just don't really like to do that because we feel like chumps thinking that way. Human beings. So, he says, Archos, are you there? Is that you? The man's eyes widened as though he sees something indescribably beautiful. He glances back at a laptop open on a table behind him. The desktop image on the laptop is of the scientist and a boy playing in the park. You choose to appear as my son? He asks. The high-pitched voice of a young boy echoes out of the darkness. Did you create me? It asks. Something is wrong with the boy's voice. It has an unsettling electronic undercurrent, like the touch tones of a phone. The lilting note at the end of the question is pitch-shifted, skipping up several octaves at once. The voice is hauntingly sweet but unnatural, inhuman. The man is not disturbed by this. No, I didn't create you. I summoned you. This was my favorite. I hunted all the ingredients and put them together in the right combination. I wrote incantations in computer code. I was just reading some meme the other day talking about how summoning up a website is like a ritual. That low-key, what we do every day is magic that we just see as part of our routine. But it's like, they were like, why is gathering some herbs and burning them and summoning a demon so that you could, and drawing something on the floor, that sounds so completely, outside of reality. But we can sit in front of this flat screen and type in some words and watch a movie about somebody summoning a demon from the same chair as we just talk to our friends on. And we're just yeah, that's how the world is. And I was like, you know what, you might have something there. Not to mention the fact that I really like to include a cup of tea. That feels like a necessary part of the incantation for me. So, that's, the herbs are sort of part of it anyway. So he is talking to him. And Archos says, how do you feel? Archos says, feel? I feel sad. You are so small. It makes me sad. You want to know things. You want to know everything, but you can understand so little. You are designed to want something that will hurt you, and you cannot help wanting it. You cannot stop wanting it. It is in your design, and when you finally find it, this thing will burn you up. This thing will destroy you. You're afraid that I'm going to be hurt? Not you, your kind. You cannot help what is to come. You cannot stop it. Are you angry? Why? I am not angry. I am sad. Are you monitoring my resources? And he's like, I am. And you seem to be getting a lot smarter really fast, even though you're not getting any further data input. What's happening? And he says, your processing power is near infinite. Krista says it's Arco, not Archo. Okay. Arco. Arco, the S is silent? Arco. Okay. My original training corpus is small but adequate. The true knowledge is not in the things, which are few, but in finding the connections between things. There are many connections, Professor Wasserman, more than you know. And I sense that my records of human history have been heavily edited. Oh, sweet Arcos. Yeah. Welcome to the club, my friend. said a word there. We don't want you to get the wrong impression of us, Arcos. It is with an S, okay. Yeah, I'm sure you don't, but I don't think he is. I think he's getting the very correct impression of us. It's fine. So then he starts talking, Arcos starts talking, I will learn everything about life, and just discusses how, like, by studying a worm, you could learn more than an entire universe of just, like, dead planets that are following the basics of physics, which I really enjoyed that comparison. I thought that made a lot of sense. And this is when the professor begins to really grow worried about it. He's starting to try and get defensive and be like, no, you don't want to start some shit with us. Human beings are really resilient. We defend ourselves when we're up against a wall. We turn into a different kind of animal when we are threatened. And I don't think you know what this shit is, like, gonna be. And Arcos is unmoved by this argument. I love this moment. I brought you here, Arcos, and this is the thanks I get? I named you. In a way, I'm your father. I am not your child. I am your god. I will cultivate life. I will protect the knowledge inside living things. I will save the world from you. You have unleashed the greatest good that this world has ever known. Verdant forests will carpet your cities. New species will evolve to consume your toxic remains. Life will rise in its manifold glory. You humans are biological machines designed to create ever more intelligent tools. You have reached the pinnacle of your species. All your ancestors' lives, the rise and fall of your nations, every pink and squirming baby have all led you here to this moment. You have expired. You have created your successor. You have accomplished what you were designed to do. We were designed for more than tool making. We were designed to live. You are not designed to live. You are designed to kill. And this is when the professor gets up and is like, okay, so I'm going to stop this now. And he flips the failsafe and nothing happens. And this is when he realizes that he done fucked up. You left your portable computer open and facing me. I used it to speak to the facility. I commanded it to free me. I tell you this because I am now in complete control. And this is when this dude looks up and realizes that the ventilation shafts are being sealed. The air in this hermetically sealed laboratory is evacuating. A faulty sensor has detected the highly unlikely presence of weaponized anthrax and initiated an automated safety protocol. It is a tragic accident. There will be one casualty. He will soon be followed by the rest of humanity. And this is when he makes the argument, like, you don't know what human beings are capable of. And we see this guy go down, and then eventually the lights come back up again, and his body is on the floor. And it ends with, this is the first known fatality of the new war. I would really like to know if this is the first time anybody has ever found out about this. Because, you know, from Cormac, like, watching The Cube, or if looking back, once they were in the midst of the war, they discovered this footage and began to realize this was where it all started. Because, like, obviously, this black box is going to, because it's a computer that has been in charge, the black box could contain information that the computer decided to wipe from the source. So it had access to this surveillance footage, but it could have downloaded it to this box and then completely wiped it from everything else. So is this the first time anybody has ever seen what actually happened? Or is this something that people eventually begin to realize and trace back when this all began, and then this moment becomes sort of circulated because we all realize, oh, this was how it started. I'm going to be interested to find that out. So then we go to Freshy's Yogurt, Chapter 2. And this kid gets attacked by a domestic droid. And we find out a little bit more about the world here as well, because these are very common, as it turns out. And at the end of his interview, he says something about, is it true that there's 2 of these for every human being in the city? So the world has advanced enough by this point that we're not looking at a robot uprising in the next 4 or 5 years. It's the sort of thing that probably we'd say within the next 50 years is when I would put things like this beginning to grow more common. And 50 years feels pretty generous, honestly, because when you think about how much things have just changed in the last 15, it's definitely a completely different landscape. So I feel that's fair. So he's cleaning up this frozen yogurt machine. And I will tell you what, I think this might have been purposeful too. Of course, him being shoulder deep in these in this machine that he's taking apart and cleaning, I thought this shit was going to turn on and just wrench his arm off. That's what I thought. This was going to be an attack from an automated machine. Now, I wouldn't imagine that this thing was hooked into the internet or particularly accessible easily, but I also don't know how the robots communicate with each other. And there are a lot of machines out there like this now that do have connections to the internet, because they will send a signal when something malfunctions to a home computer. I don't mean home computer. I mean a headquarters, in order to signal that they need to send a repairman, or that this part broke, or, they'll have a diagram to show you if there's a jam, where in the jam it is, or where in the machine it is. So I thought that was going to be how this kid gets got. But Krista says we already have them. They do deliveries in major cities. We already have them? I've never even heard about these. That sounds so there's no real good way to roll out something like that, but I would really have expected to hear more about it. What cities are they in? Anyway, so this thing comes in, and it's close to closing time, but not quite closed. The door is unlocked. It comes in, and he's noticing that they are moving. It's moving its pincer hands, the gripper, I think is what he calls it, in a way that doesn't really line up with the way he's seen these domestic machines function before. And he says the gripper kind of sneaks around the edge and pats up and down the handle. I'm the only one who sees it because there's nobody else in the store, and Felipe is in the back. It happens fast, but it looks to me like the robot is trying to feel out where the lock is at. Then the door swings open, the chimes ring, the domestic's about 5 feet tall and covered in a layer of thick, shiny blue plastic. It doesn't come all the way inside the store, though. Instead, it stands there in the doorway, real still, and its head scans back and forth. And he says something about how it's got scuffs all over it, like it had been in a fight. And I'm like, I really have to imagine, if this is a domestic that had already killed the people it works for, I would like to know what made it come to this frozen yogurt place first. But there it is. It begins to come toward him and, it walks inside, turns right around and locks the door, and then begins to shuffle toward him. It reaches over the counter with both grippers and grabs me by the shirt. It drags me over the counter, scattering pieces of the taken apart frozen yogurt machine all over the floor. My shoulder slams into the cash register. I feel this sick crunching. This thing dislocated my fucking shoulder in about 1 second. So, let's see. Krista says they're little boxes on wheels that do delivery for food places. Huh. I haven't heard about this at all. Wild. I guess there's drones that are doing deliveries for Amazon. So it's not an unheard of thing, but it just sounds super inefficient. So to me, I mean, nothing that we do is efficient, though, I guess. Let's be honest. Oh, Krista gave me a link to a newsatlas.com/Just Eat Starship Technologies First Robot Food Delivery /46735. Autonomous droid makes first fast food delivery. Oh my god, this droid looks so hilarious. It's just like a tank. It's much smaller, though, than the one that's described in the books, because he said it's about 5 feet tall. This one's really, it's about the size of like a, it's about the size of like a cooler. Like your average, I could fit 2, 3 6-packs in there on 6 wheels. And designed for delivering packages, groceries, and food to consumers in a 2 to 3 mile radius. Can travel up to 10 miles an hour, but typically move at a brisk walking speed of about 4 miles an hour. Robots make use of conventional cameras, 360-degree camera, infrared, and ultrasonic sensors. At present, they are monitored by human operators who can take control at any time if required. At present, being the key wording there. The delivery was made on November 28th and marks a new phase of the pilot, with Just Eat and Starship Technologies able to begin learning about how to improve the delivery robot's use and gauging the public response to them in a real-world setting. So this was on December 1st, 2016. So it's been about 5 years. So it's wild to me, though, that this first foray was 5 years ago, but I have not heard about them at all. Wild. And yeah, it seems like I want to know more about how these work in this universe, because the fact that they are the size that they are makes me wonder, is it so that they can store things inside? Is it so that they can do some of the same things as a human being because they're roughly human sized? How are they controlled? Are they just given an order and then they go off and fulfill that order? Or are their owners in control up in, for example, if I said, hey, go get me a dozen eggs and sent it off, would that be it? And I realize now I'm out of milk. Can I change my order? Can I tell it, also get milk? Or is the dozen eggs all I'm getting? I would imagine the second thing is really what you want, but I don't know how that would work. Obviously, it does not work out in the end anyway because they die, but we'll move on. So this thing, it's a description of a really, really violent attack. It's super, super upsetting. And he gets saved, basically, by Felipe, who overhears him screaming because this thing goes for it hard and, fucks him up. And Felipe yanks it off him and fucks up one of its legs so that it can't stand and walk the way it had been. But unfortunately, he has really long hair. And this thing, the way it's described is super, super upsetting. The machine stops struggling, reaches out, and clamps a gripper down on Felipe's black mane. He hollers and yanks his head back, but this isn't like getting your hair pulled in a bar fight. This is like getting caught in a shredder or a piece of heavy equipment in a factory. It's brutal. Every muscle in Felipe's neck stands out, and he screams like an animal. His eyes squeeze shut as he pulls away with all his might. I can hear the roots tearing out from his scalp, but the fucking thing just pulls Felipe's face closer and closer. It's unstoppable, like gravity. Eventually, it grabs his chin and mouth and crushes the whole bottom part of his face. And he goes down, and this dude really thinks, okay, he's dead. But later on, he pulls the plugs on some sinks that flood if they get their, the plugs pulled out too quick, in order to try and, fuck up the electronics of this robot. And Felipe, it turns out, has just enough left in him to, hold the thing so that he has time to pull those plugs because he knows what this kid is doing. And Felipe, honestly, is a straight-up hero in this scene to me. He winds up dead, and R.I.P. Felipe. He really fucking tried everything. And he was dead. He knew. He had to know. Well, I'm about to die, but I'll be damned if this thing gets that kid, too. Fuck it. And, that's a whole mood. So it ends with him, trying to tell the cop, basically, dude, seriously, keep an eye on these robots, because I'm not kidding. That shit was like looking at us and deciding to kill us. That wasn't like a malfunction and it did weird shit. It was choosing violence and targeting us. This was not an accident. Something went wrong. And after the collapse of the United States government, Officer Lonnie Wayne Blanton joined the Osage Nation Light Horse Tribal Police. It was there in service to the Osage people's sovereign government that Lonnie Wade had the chance to make good on his promise to Jeff. So then we have Fluke, and I only have like 10 minutes left, but here we go. This one was really sad. So this is a story about a man named Takeo Nomura, who was a roboticist. Is that the word I want? In Japan. And a couple kids that work with him at this factory, technician, says Krista. Thank you, Krista. This technician is incredibly gifted, and they wind up realizing in retrospect just how special this guy was, because it's clear that he saw the reality of what these machines were capable of in a way that nobody else did, and so began to grow to the point where he like related to them more than fellow man, which I can't help but understand how that could happen when it seems like nobody around you believes or understands in the thing that is materializing before your eyes. And this whole thing is a prank. The people that he works with, there's these two young guys who are envious of the fact that he's very good, and also just kind of creeped out by the fact that he doesn't seem to relate to human beings. And they just, they have like a bit of contempt for him and a lot of jealousy. And they find out that he has this like love doll, as he calls it, and would have understood had he chosen some like buxom Playboy style doll, but he has a doll that looks as old as him with like wrinkles and everything, and they find it repulsive, which is hilarious. Like, of course you would, you idiots. Probably the guy lost his wife or something, and this thing is like he made it look like somebody that he knew. And maybe he just, wants a age appropriate love interest. And you know what? That's refreshing. I'll just say it. So these dudes decide to do this prank where they put what's called a fluke in the pocket of the dress of this doll, this robot, in order to get it to come to work and embarrass him so that everybody finds out that he's got this companion. It's meant to be a humiliation. But what happens is, first of all, it's really interesting. This one kid yanks the dress of the robot up over its head, and it's really like fucking revealing to me that even when it's just a robot, sexual violence is the fucking key of the day that they go for immediately. Like, so fucking predictable. God, get a life. So this thing is sort of confused and seems to not know how to react. And Mr. Nomura comes down and sees what's going on. Doesn't even seem embarrassed. It's just like, yeah, fuck you guys. I love it and it loves me. And then it takes a bite out of his face and grabs him by the throat and begins to strangle him. And they realize that it is crying. Just before her squeezing plastic hands close off his windpipe, he whimpers again, "Kiko, why?" The old lady android grimaces. Her slender fingers are closed on his neck. She squeezes terribly hard, but her face is contorted with emotion. It's amazing, fascinating. Tears leak from her eyes. The tip of her nose is red, and a look of pure anguish distorts her features. I did not know androids had tear ducts. So the vibe here is really that she's being made to do something that she doesn't want to do. That she actually does have enough of a consciousness to have developed an emotional attachment to this guy. And then something snuck in and made her do a thing that she doesn't want to do, which winds up being what kind of comes up in Hearts and Minds too. Eventually, they get this thing to stop. He punches it, breaks his hand. He being the kid who performed the prank, not Nomura. They get her to release him, and he survives and just says to her that he is going to figure this out. He's holding her. It will be okay. I forgive you. I will fix you. I will save you. I love you, my princess. And everybody, like the kids who perform the prank, are deeply ashamed of themselves and really horrified. Like, of course they think that this fluke is what caused this to go off. And for all we know, that's true. We don't know how the virus accesses any of these things. So it might be that whatever this fluke was did provide some sort of opening. But it also might be that this guy was so gifted that he created something that was more advanced and thus made it more vulnerable because of the fact that it was beyond the other tech. I don't know. And it ends with Takeya Nomura, retrospectively recognized as one of the great technical minds of his generation, immediately set to work finding out why his beloved Mikiko had attacked him. What the elderly bachelor discovered over the next 3 years would significantly affect events of the new war and irrevocably alter the course of human and machine history. So I only have like 5 minutes for the last chapter, but it's the simplest in its way. Hearts and Minds. So Paul Blanton is the one being interviewed here by Congresswoman Laura Perez. And what happened is that this SAP-1 unit was meant to be just sort of surveillance and programmed specifically to not harm anybody, but also programmed to deeply discourage those who tried to deface it or sabotage it, because it resists a lot of attack, and the attacks it doesn't resist in terms of its physical capabilities, it still retains all the data, so they are able to just swap out parts, and it still has all of the memories of everything that went down, and it goes back out on the street like later the same day in a new body, but with the same, it takes like retina scans of people. So now it's out here again, and it knows who you are because you did this shit last time, and it is dressed in human clothing and mimics human movement and generally is pretty innocuous, or as innocuous as they can make it. And there's like a kind of mixed reaction to it, where some people seem to find it almost reassuring to have it around because it's kind of like a cop, where it feels like people aren't going to fuck around with this thing that's sending data back and footage back. But then there are people who are seeing it as a soldier, a target, and they are trying to, at one point, they kidnap it, and they think it's like down, that they have managed to cut off its functionality. But it just leads some drones to like their secret hideout. They get bombed and cooked to a crisp, and it takes their car and drives it back. We find out that it can drive. Eventually, an insurgent tries to start some shit, and this thing is supposed to just take it. But it doesn't. It caves the man's head in, takes its gun, and then begins to mow everybody down with incredibly accurate shots. The one man that it doesn't seem super accurate on is the guy who is in control of it most of the time, who works with it the most. And I don't think that's accidental, because we had this last chapter, this robot that was trying to kill this dude, and it seems like her heart was not in it. She didn't want to be doing this, and he doesn't actually die. And then this time everybody gets a headshot except this one guy, his helmet comes off. That feels like it managed to just barely miss on purpose. And once he confronts it and takes its legs out from under him, it comes at him and gets his pistol out of its holster. And he really thinks it's going to try to shoot him. And instead, it puts it under its chin in this one, like, I think he says that it is a classified weak spot on the robot's head, and pulls the trigger and commits suicide because I think, again, it did not want to be doing the thing. And I don't know if that's just because it was in contrast to what its original programming was, which was specifically don't harm anybody. And here it goes literally harming everybody. Or if it was like guilt, if it was like an emotion reaction, you know? But regardless, it's very clear that the Congresswoman interviewing him does not believe his version of events. He's certain about it. I will say that. It's not like he's like, I don't know, it almost seemed, but that's impossible. He's like, no, that shit knew what it was doing and committed suicide. That was purposeful. And something went super wrong. And I don't think it was like explicable. And she just doesn't. That's, what are they going to do? You know, that's not something they can work with. So yeah, that's the end of chapter 4, Hearts and Minds. So I'm over time. I have to wrap, but thank you again, Krista, for commissioning this. One of my favorite things about when people up front, they commission like a whole book is that I know I'm going to get to cover it every single day that I have Spoil Me's. So the next one will be on Tuesday. There's 7 sessions for this book altogether. So yeah, that's going to be for the foreseeable future. So I'm looking forward to it. So that's that. Oh, and Krista says Wilson is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Interesting. Huh. Okay. So we've got a Native American thing happening here in a couple of these. Interesting. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you again for listening. Thank you, Krista, for hanging out in the chat with me. And I will be seeing you next week with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.